Most people file two things in separate drawers of the mind. In one drawer, fashion, color, cut, the jacket on its hanger, the coat by the door. A matter of taste and nothing heavier than that. In the other drawer, armor, steel, museums, dead knights, a technology that ended long ago and left behind only rust and gift shop replicas. The tailored jacket in that first drawer began its life in the second. So did the belted coat, the stiff, built-up shoulder that makes a blazer red as sharp, the little strap sewn across the top of it, the double row of buttons on a pea coat, the flap sealed over the chest of a raincoat. Each of those began as equipment, built to keep a body alive in a fight. The danger went away. The shape stayed. This is the story of how armor turned into clothing, and it runs the opposite way from how the tale usually gets told. The familiar version treats fashion as decoration that now and then borrows a soldierly look for a season. The truth is older and far more literal. For long stretches of history, the thing that guarded a fighter's body and the thing hanging in an ordinary person's wardrobe were not two different objects at all. They were one object, thickened. Start with the least glamorous piece of armor ever devised. It has no shine and no edge, and almost nobody has heard of it. Yet the doublet, the jacket, and eventually the modern suit all climb down from it. The garment was called a Gambeson. Elsewhere, it went by ichcahuipilli, or arming doublet, or padded jack. Underneath the different names, it was one simple thing, a thick, quilted coat, layers of linen or wool, sometimes stuffed with scrap cloth or horsehair, stitched through in long vertical channels so the padding could not shift. No metal anywhere in it, and it was real armor, not a comfort lining. A well-made Gambeson could turn a slashing edge and swallow the shock of a blow that would otherwise break bone. Which is why archers wore one alone, why foot soldiers who could never afford steel wore one alone, and why knights wore one beneath their mail and plate, since a shell of steel with nothing under it drives every impact straight into the body it is meant to protect. Even the word we use every day remembers this. Jacket comes down from the Old French jaquet, a small jac, and the jac, or jack, was a short padded tunic, sometimes lined with mail, worn as soft armor in its own right. The deeper roots of the word are argued over, and one trail leads back through Spanish and Arabic to a term for a breastplate. What is not in doubt is that the thing on your back shares a name with a piece of medieval body protection. The word ichcahuipilli hides a second small journey. It arrived in medieval French from the Arabic al-kutun, the cotton. The padding and the trick of quilting cloth until it turned defensive reached Europe partly through contact with the Islamic world across the crusading centuries. A word for a battlefield garment turns out to be a word for a plant fiber, carried west along the very roads the fiber traveled. Picture the morning of a battle, somewhere in the 15th century. A knight stands in a tent while a servant moves around him, and the steel does not simply go on. First, a linen shirt, then the arming doublet, quilted, close, sewn with small cloth loops and short laces at the shoulders and the elbows and the hips. Those loops are called arming points. The plates are tied onto them one by one, so the whole weight of the armor hangs from the padded garment rather than dragging on skin. Patches of mail are stitched into the doublet itself at the armpit and the inside of the elbow, covering the gaps the rigid plates leave open. By the time the servant steps back, the knight is sealed in a suit of steel, and doing the quiet work at the center of it, holding the entire arrangement to the body, is a padded jacket buttoned down the front. Here the garment stopped being a secret worn under metal. Across the 14th and 15th centuries, the arming doublet climbed out from beneath the plate and became clothing in its own right. In the towns of northern Italy, men who had never once ridden to war took to wearing the padded doublet in the street, buttoned and fitted and cut close, because the garment still carried the scent of knighthood and rank. Costume historians have a favorite surviving example, and it deserves to be known by name. It is the Pourpoint of Charles de Blois, sewn around the 1360s, kept now in a textile museum in the French city of Lyon. It is one of the best preserved civilian garments to reach us from that far back, And it is, in essence, an arming doublet raised to high fashion, close-fitting, padded, assembled from more than 24 shaped pieces of cloth so it would grip the torso, its sleeves engineered around the shoulder so the wearer could lift his arms without the whole thing binding. The front shuts with rows of small cloth-covered buttons, dozens of them, with more running down each sleeve. The outer fabric is a gold-figured silk that had been woven far to the east, under the Mongol Empire, in what is now Iran or Iraq, then carried halfway across the world to dress a French lord. A soldier's undergarment rendered in imported silk, worn purely to be admired. The obvious complaint at this point is that this is a European story about European knights. It is not. On the far side of the planet, a civilization that never forged a single plate of steel had arrived at exactly the same idea, and had done it so well that the Europeans who turned up wearing metal ended up copying them. In Mesoamerica, Aztec and Maya warriors went to war in the ichcahuipilli. The word is built from the NAH watl for cotton joined to the word for an ordinary upper garment, which tells you precisely what it was. A shirt, thickened for battle. Unspun cotton was packed between layers of woven cloth and quilted into a dense jacket a finger or two thick, sometimes stiffened further by soaking it in brine so that drying salt hardened the weave. It stopped arrows. It absorbed the strike of the ma-qua weedle, the wooden war club edged with blades of volcanic glass. When Spanish soldiers landed with their breastplates and helmets, they found the local armor was lighter, cooler in the heat, and flexible in a way that steel could never manage, and many of them quietly set their own plate aside and took up the cotton. One conquistador who survived the invasion, Bernal de Os del Castello, recorded that his men padded themselves in quilted cotton armor because against arrows and darts, it was simply the sensible thing to wear. There is a bolder version of this claim that runs too far, and it is worth pausing on, because getting it right is the entire reason a channel like this exists. You will read that Aztec cotton armor could stop a musket ball, that it beat steel outright. The evidence does not carry the strong version. Against firearms, the cotton had hard limits, and the costume scholar Patricia A. Walt, who studied these garments in detail, treats them as superb against the weapons of their own world rather than as some lost bulletproof miracle. I find the careful account more impressive than the myth, not less. Two peoples who never met on opposite shores of an ocean both worked out that the cheapest and softest armor a person could own was a padded copy of the shirt already on their back. So the padded coat was armor, and the armor became clothing. The hinge the whole story turns on is a single question. Why did the clothing outlive the armor? Why is there a doublet in the museum and a jacket on your body and no plate on either? The answer is gunpowder. Across the 15 and 1600s, firearms slowly grew better and cheaper and more common until the old arithmetic of armor collapsed. A breastplate thick enough to stop a musket ball was too heavy to march in all day, so the steel came off in pieces. The leg armor first, then the arms, until a soldier kept little more than a helmet and a cuirass, and in the end, often not even those. It did not happen in a single year, and men argued about it for generations, but the direction never wavered. The protective job died out. The look did not. This is the turn the whole story has been walking toward, and it is stranger than a neat family tree of coats. What survived was never the protection, it was the signal. Armor had always done two jobs in the same breath. It kept a fighter alive, and it announced who he was, how much he was worth, how much harm he could do. When gunpowder retired the first job, the second job simply carried on without it, moving into cloth that protected no one from anything. The transition left visible fossils. As full plate grew too heavy to justify, soldiers moved through a whole family of half-cloth armors that already looked like coats. There was the brigandine and the jack of plates, a fabric or leather garment with dozens of small steel plates riveted secretly between the layers so that from the outside a man in armor looked like a man in a slightly stiff jacket. There was the buff coat, a thick oxhide coat worn by 17th century cavalry once the steel arms and legs had been set aside, heavy enough to turn a sword cut on its own. Each step traded metal for cloth and hardness for movement, and each step looked a little more like ordinary dress and a little less like a machine. The doublet kept sliding down the same slope. Over the 1600s, it loosened and lengthened into the coat and waistcoat that a later century would tailor into the three-piece suit. Pull the thread far enough, and the businessman's jacket and the knight's arming doublet turn out to be the same garment, 5 centuries apart, with the padding thinned and the danger taken out. You can watch the two swap places inside the 16th century. As civilian doublets grew a fashionable padded bulge at the belly, a shape that picked up the odd name peas cod after a pea pod, the armorers followed the tailors. Steel breastplates of the late 1500s were hammered into that same pointed swelling profile so that a suit of parade armor would echo the outline of the clothes worn with it. The copying had reversed. The armor was now imitating the fashion. A nobleman's steel was being shaped to look like a courtier's padded coat, which had itself been shaped a century earlier out of a soldier's padded coat. The two had circled each other so long that no one could say which was the leader. Skip past the last knights and the last muskets, and one more garment makes the identical journey, this time almost within living memory. Its origin is no guess and no legend. It is a coat that most people own or wish they did. The trench coat began as military kit in the First World War. The cloth came first, a tightly woven, breathable, water-repelling fabric called gabardine, developed by Thomas Berber E. back in 1879, when British officers needed something to endure the mud and the endless rain of the front. Coats in that fabric were adapted for the trenches, and the name of the ditch fastened itself to the garment for good. Look at what the coat honestly is. The straps across the shoulders, the EP alettes, once carried an officer's rank markings and kept a bag or a strap from sliding off. The metal rings on the belt, the D-rings, were fitted to hang equipment, a map case, a pair of field glasses, in some accounts a sword or grenades. The flap across the upper chest let rain sheet away and let a little air move. The deep pockets swallowed maps. The belt drew tight against the weather. Every single feature was an answer to a particular misery of trench warfare. Then the war ended, and the officers came home, and the coat came home with them. The rank straps now hold nothing. The rings hang nothing. The storm flap guards a chest that meets no weather worse than a walk to the station. The first time I looked properly at the shoulder of a trench coat and understood that the little strap existed to stop binoculars from slipping off a soldier, the whole garment rearranged itself in front of me. It is survival equipment that we wear today, entirely for the way it looks. Not every thread in this lineage is that clean, and one of the most repeated stories is likely half invented. The wild, slashed, and puffed clothing of 16th century Europe, with sleeves cut open so bright fabric could be pulled through the gaps, is often blamed on German and Swiss mercenaries, who are said to have started the fashion by patching their ruined clothes with strips of cloth looted from beaten enemies. It is a wonderful story. It is also exactly the kind of tidy origin tale that historians have learned to distrust, and I would not lean much weight on it. What is solid is the wider pattern it sits inside. Soldiers' clothing, over and over, walked off the field and into everyone else's wardrobe. The words give it away too. A cardigan is named for the Earl of Cardigan, who led the doomed charge of the Light Brigade in the Crimean War, and who kept his men in warm knitted jackets. The raglan sleeve is named for Lord Raglan, the one-armed British commander in the same war, whose tailor cut a sleeve that ran all the way up to the collar to suit a man with a single arm. The balaclava takes its name from a Crimean battlefield. In each case, the style itself is older than the name, but the name records where it came to public notice, on a soldier. The pattern did not stop when the last armories went quiet. It moved onto the runway. In 1966, the designer Paco Rabanne showed a collection he called, with a shrug, 12 unwearable dresses, built from linked discs of plastic and metal. Everyone who saw them reached for the same word. They looked like armor. He agreed and named a run of his metal pieces the Armor Look. Chainmail, the flexible steel mesh of medieval war, had come back as an evening gown. Rawban was not a one-off. In the decades after him, the Runway kept staging the same revival. Breastplates molded in leather and metal, corsetry rebuilt to look like body armor, whole collections that borrowed the vocabulary of the tournament and the battlefield and called it beauty. It keeps returning. A structured shoulder on a jacket reads as authority, because a broad, hard shoulder once meant a plated one. The padded shoulders of a 1980s power suit did the very job the Pease cod belly did in 1580. They borrowed the outline of a body braced against the world and sold it back as confidence. Camouflage, the bomber jacket, the field jacket, cargo trousers, almost every wave of modern street fashion has, at some point, dressed itself in demilitarized war kit and called it style. The language never let go of the truth either. It still calls a stiff protective jacket a piece of armor, and still describes a person as being in their armor when they mean a good suit worn into a hard meeting. The metaphor was never really a metaphor, it is a memory. There is one last turn, and it closes the circle. While fashion spent 5 centuries keeping armor's look and throwing away its function, engineering quietly did the reverse. It kept the function and proved the oldest idea right. In 1965, a chemist named Stephanie Kwolek, working at the Pourpoint laboratories, created the fiber that became Kevlar. Modern soft body armor is woven from it, and it works on the exact principle the Gambeson and the ichcahuipilli worked on. The fiber is spun from long chains of a tough synthetic polymer, an AR-amide, and thread for thread it is stronger for its weight than steel wire. It does not stop a bullet by outmassing it. It stops the bullet the way a net stops a thrown ball, by many layers catching the force and dragging its energy out sideways until nothing is left to push forward. The bulletproof vest under a soldier's shirt today is not the descendant of the steel breastplate. It is the descendant of the padded jacket. A knight from the 1360s would not know the material, but he would know the strategy on sight. Beat the blow by catching it in cloth, not by outweighing it. The soft armor the knights wore under their plate, the cotton armor the Aztecs wore instead of it, had been pointing at the future the whole time. None of this asks you to dress any differently. It only asks you to look. The next time you pull on a coat, hunt for the parts that no longer do anything. The strap over the shoulder that holds no rank, the buttons set too high to ever fasten, the flap sewn across the chest that expects no storm. The stiffened shoulder standing sentry over a body whose worst threat this week is a long meeting. Every one of those was, at some point, equipment a life leaned on. We took the danger out of the world, or we tell ourselves we did, and we kept the shape of being ready for it. Half your wardrobe is armor that forgot what it was guarding you from.